And thanks to all of you who are here this evening. I'm really excited to share this information with you. If you haven't heard, we've got a presidential election coming up in just 4 weeks. And so the issue of voting and voting rights is really top of mind for so many of us. And I, I hope you find that the information that we share tonight is helpful to you, whether you're looking for information that will help you vote, or help you to help someone else vote. So I guess, as Stephanie said, I am a retired attorney. I retired my license in Connecticut a couple of years ago. But once an attorney, always an attorney. And I guess I wouldn't be a good one if I didn't offer at least one juicy disclaimer every day. Oftentimes it's just to my husband, but I think it's important just to share some of this information for you. I won't read it word for word, but just tell you that the purpose of this disclaimer is to let you know, one, this session is really just for informational and educational purposes only. The views that I may express throughout this presentation are mine alone and may or may not represent some views of CaringKind. So keep that in mind. The content also doesn't obligate CaringKind to set any particular policies or practices or guidelines themselves around this material. And I think probably most important of all, at least to me, is that this session should not be interpreted as presenting legal advice or offering legal representation. This is absolutely, it's good general information, but it's not a substitute for independent legal advice or professional judgment, especially in this area of the law. So voting rights laws are very complex, and they operate at both a federal and sort of state and local level. So we think about our right to vote as being born under the 14th Amendment in the U.S. Constitution, which is true. And we have a Voting Rights Act, and we have the Americans for Disabilities Act that protect those rights for people with disabilities, and a myriad of other federal laws. But for the most part, even for national elections, like a presidential election, it's up to the states to really carry out those elections. And each state can have many different laws and regulations as to how they carry out their duties. So that's just a little table set here. But what we're really here to talk about, as Stephanie said, is how can people with dementia or Alzheimer's disease or another cognitive impairment vote? So first of all, do they have a right to vote? And the answer is a resounding absolutely yes, they do. A medical diagnosis of dementia or Alzheimer's disease or other cognitive impairment does not automatically bar a person from voting. And in fact, in most states, only a judge may decide that a specific person can't vote. Now, the laws in these states vary on that. Some states actually say, really, even a judge is not going to be able to state that a single person can't vote. The right stems from the Constitution, and we are, as a state, going to honor that. In some states, there are laws on the books that, for instance, say that someone who is under a guardianship, or in other states, it's called conservatorship, A judge may restrict their right to vote, but that would have to be something that is actually ordered by court order. There are some states that have very broad-based laws that may bar sort of I'll call them classes of people from voting. So even say maybe a state, I think Missouri is an example of where a person under a guardianship is sort of assumed not to have the right to vote. That can be challenged, and may eventually be challenged in court at on a in a lawsuit, because that type of law that says that a whole class of people under a guardianship may not be able to vote may violate the Constitution. So essentially, what's important to keep in mind is that everyone who wants to vote should be given the opportunity to vote. And that's what our kind of working premise really is going to be this evening. So that said, there are some guidelines about when you are helping somebody vote who may have a disability and some kind of a limited capacity that may impact how they vote or how they exercise that vote. So we're going to go through some of what impacts that and what you should know if you're going to vote, and you may have a diagnosis of dementia and need some help, or whether you're helping someone. So first of all, there's no requirement in any jurisdiction that I'm aware of, any state, that a person pass a cognitive test in order to vote. And so we generally don't, whether they're polling officials, election officials, or even ourselves, we don't test each other, question each other to see if we know enough or have the capacity to vote. So that's not a requirement. There's also no requirement that a person be able to name all the candidates or explain the issues that are on a ballot before they actually go and fill out a ballot. If that was the case, probably a lot of people would not be voting, at least on every issue that may be at issue in a particular election. And when a person is completing a ballot, whether in person or an absentee ballot, there's no need for the person to complete the entire ballot in order to vote. So if there are many offices on a ballot, there are referendum on a ballot, and in this case, it's a presidential election, a person may only want to vote for president. And they can leave everything blank. And if they fill that out, then their vote is going to count. But that doesn't mean that there aren't some sort of general, sort of broad-based requirements for people to vote. So the American Bar Association and the Penn Memory Center put out this. There's a picture here on the right. They put out this voting guide, and they've done this for a number of years, and they recently updated it to basically assist people with cognitive impairments and people who support them on voting. And you'll have access to that quick guide. It's in our resources at the end of the presentation. But what they say is there are basically kind of two requirements. One is a person just has to express a desire to vote. And even if they can't say so with words, if through body language and pointing, that could be enough for someone to express a desire to vote. And they have to be able to express a preference. So that could be, say, for a referendum item, that may be, do you vote in favor, yes, or do you vote no? So if they're going to vote on that, they have to be able to indicate which one. Or for president, there may be, a Democratic candidate, a Republican candidate, and maybe some other third-party candidates. They can express a preference between one of those candidates or write someone in, and it could be anybody. Um, and that's really all they need to be able to vote. There's no additional requirements. So, if you've sort of crossed that threshold, um, who can help a person with dementia vote? How do I know who can do that? Well, really, almost anyone can help someone vote. A family member, a friend, a professional or personal caregiver, say a nursing home or assisted living worker can help if the person voting is living in long-term care, or a poll worker. So if the person voting is and needs help and is going to vote in person, they can request help from a poll worker or poll workers. Now, there are two types of people who cannot help. So if you're working and you have a boss, that person can't help you, or someone else who works for that boss or who's representing that employer, they can't help you. And if you're working and you belong to a union, an officer or an agent of that union can't help you. But otherwise, a person with dementia is entitled to have whoever they want to help them help them. So essentially, then, what can I do to help a person with dementia vote? So again, start by finding out if they want to vote, because that's one of the big requirements. So you can ask the person, do you want to vote? And if the answer is no, you stop the process right there. But if yes, then you ask if they need assistance and what kind of assistance do they need. Would you like me to read the ballot? Would you like me to help you mark the ballot? We're going to go into some of those specifics in just a bit. But it's important when you're assisting somebody to really be aware of what their communication challenges may be, if they have them, and use some techniques to help you really facilitate and support the person in voting. But before you do that, I would say, and we're going to go through some scenarios where this becomes clearer. If the person wants to talk about the candidates, get your thoughts on the candidates, wants to talk about issues, positions, those kinds of things, have that conversation before you actually begin to fill out the ballot, because this will become clearer as we go on. Once you really start helping the person fill out the ballot, you can't really communicate any other information other than what's on the ballot itself. And that's either the candidates' names and their parties and what office they're running for, or in some cases it could be a referendum item that you really have to read word for word. So we'll talk a little bit more about that and making sure that you're adhering to that guideline so that you don't sort of run afoul of it. But once you do get into helping a person with a ballot, and that could be helping them complete a paper ballot, say an absentee ballot, or it could be helping them actually in a polling place. So what you want to do is you want to be very attentive to the voter. Listen carefully to what they're telling you, both in terms of the language that they're speaking, the words that they're using, body language that they're using. Speak very clearly to them, and make sure you understand their directions, and get a sense of whether they are understanding you. Get and sort of keep the person's attention, so that they're clear all along the process. So some of these ballots could take a while to fill out, depending on how many offices and issues are up for election. You may want to time your discussion or the whole voting person who you're helping. So sometimes evenings are not good, not for any of us, because we get tired. And that may not be a time that's good for them to be making decisions, to be having those kinds of conversations. Early in the morning may or may not be a good time. So if you know the person well, time your discussion to what works best for them. And of course, always show respect. And this can mean just respecting their preferences, but also in some cases, giving them privacy. Some people would be very comfortable sharing how they're voting with you, but others may not be. And so it's important to, be respectful of privacy. All this is listed in one of these quick guides that is going to be in the reference list. To get, I guess, drill down a little bit further, one of the other guides from the Baselton Center actually has some do's and don'ts of, that you can really apply to people living with dementia and voting. So if you are going to be reading a ballot to someone, read the ballot in a way that they can understand, which in some cases may mean reading it slowly, so that they have the opportunity to understand it and to keep up. If you are marking a ballot for somebody, which you can do if they want you to, only mark the ballot according to what the person indicates is their choice at that time. Never express your opinion, because that can bias the person and they may vote differently than how they really want. As I indicated before, it's not appropriate to ask the person questions to test whether they're capable of voting. If they want to vote and can express a preference, they can vote. Don't withhold information or give inaccurate information. So really stick to the ballot. Let that be your guide and stick to that information. And again, don't pressure the person to vote on every item. Even if it's that they really kind of get tired during the voting process and say, I don't want to do any more. I'm comfortable with what I've done up till now. You can work with that and let that go. So this really wonderful guide from the American Bar Association and Penn's Memory Center, it has presented some, I'll call them sort of case studies, very, very brief case studies, but that outline, they give 10 of them in this guide, and you'll have access to them. But someone vote and gives you some guidance on that. And so I've chosen 4 of those case studies for us to review tonight. So the first one is case 3 in the guide. And this is the scenario where the person I am helping cannot read or mark the ballot on his or her own. How can I help them? So as I've indicated, it's permissible to offer support in reading and marking the ballot, but you should only mark the ballot according to what the person indicates. If a person cannot communicate a choice, you may not mark that person's ballot. So they may say they want to vote, but just can't tell you who. You cannot mark that ballot. And we'll get into that a little bit more clearly in an upcoming scenario. But if the person communicates a choice on some ballot issues, like I've said, election of president, but not others, you may mark only those ballot items for which a choice was communicated. You can't assume that somebody who votes, say, for a Republican candidate for president will vote Republican all the way down the ballot. They have to be able to tell you that. So that was case 3. So case 4 was the voter asks me who he or she should vote for. What do I do? So one, you should not attempt to influence their preferences. That's while you're doing the ballot. You want to have conversations between now and when you fill the ballot, and you're trying to influence them with information to vote one way or another, you can have at it. But not when you're filling out the ballot. If they don't communicate a choice independently, then they don't vote. And if a person with impairment asks you while you're completing the ballot, who to vote for, again, you can't tell them. But what you might want to do as a response is say, look, the choice is yours. It's not mine, and you're free to choose whomever you wish. And you can continue to reiterate that. So then, case 5. The voter asks me questions about a candidate's background or positions while we are completing the ballot. Here again, I'm just really reiterating, you are permitted only to convey the information written on the ballot. Once you begin helping the voter complete the ballot, you should not communicate additional information to the voter. And that makes sense when you think about, what it's like when you go in to a voting booth either early in person voting or on election day. You're not talking about the issues and the candidates. And the same rules really apply if you're helping someone complete a paper ballot, an absentee ballot in their home setting. And then lastly, this question comes up a lot is, based on prior history, I know how the person would vote. I know my dad would always vote, for Democrats. Can I mark the ballot that way? If the voter cannot make a choice at the time of voting, at the time of completing the ballot, you cannot mark the ballot based on previous knowledge of the voter's preferences. And when supporting a person with impairment, you are permitted only to mark the ballot with the choice the voter makes at that time. So it's in the moment. So voting options. It's really wonderful that in so many jurisdictions we have a lot of voting options. And at least I guess that's my personal opinion, I will say. It gives people options, and it really promotes, I think, inclusion around voting and getting people who are otherwise eligible to vote to help them vote. So the options that you will see, and you'll see them in various forms with various deadlines, with various options within options, or absentee ballots. There's mail-in voting, early voting, and voting in person on election day. So let me go through just how am I going to get information on this, because this can be really confusing. So there are two types of guides that we with state by state information that we've included in the resources. So this first one here is published by the American Bar Association, and it's a 50-state listing of available voter assistance state by state. So I'll give you just sort of an example of this. I didn't want to there's a lot of words to these guides. I didn't want to necessarily put it up on the screen. But if I'm looking at the information on the New York page, and most of these listings are a couple of pages long with different types of assistance, and they will cite to the underlying state law that enables this assistance, or to regulations. So most states will know what kind of assistance can I get while voting. And this is sort of assuming that someone is going to a polling place. So I'll give you an example. So under New York law allows voters to who require assistance marking a ballot or using a voting machine to request assistance from a person of the voter's choice. So like I said, it could be they're bringing along a family member or a friend. Now, if a voter does not have someone they would like to assist them, in New York, two poll workers of different political parties may help instead. The assistant or assistants must not be a representative of the voter's employer or union. So that's where that comes in. And the assistant must mark the ballot as directed without attempt to influence the voter's choices. And they cannot share information regarding the voter's decisions. So that's the privacy piece. Now, the name of whoever helps them is going to be recorded on the registration list. Now, all polling places in New York really should be equipped with accessible ballot marking devices that are designed to help people with a broad array of disabilities vote independently and privately. So these can run the gamut from the ability to allow voters to, say, change the screen contrast, font size, to use an audio ballot, and they may be compatible with sip and puff or paddle devices. But voters who wish to use that kind of technology should inform a poll worker. Now, this could get a little complicated, and it's important that you be careful about dates. Dates get really important here. So under New York election law, there it does require that voting locations are accessible to all voters, and that includes voters with disabilities and the elderly. They actually say that in law. However, in the event that a voter's assigned location is inaccessible, and that can happen, the voter can be given permission to vote at a different location, but don't wait until the day of election, because the voter actually needs to know that the place that they usually vote at won't be accessible and must submit a written application to the Board of Elections to vote at a different place at least 14 days prior to the election. So these laws and regulations and requirements can get very, very specific, and they're going to be different state by state by state. One of the great things that these state by state voter guides has, including the next one that I'm going to show you, is they will have phone numbers and maybe emails about elections officials and how to contact them. So that may be something that you want to start doing sooner rather than later, so you have an indication of what's available to you. And that may be at the state level, it could be at the county level, it could be at the city level, et cetera. So it's great to have those contact lists. The other voter guide that we'll have here is one that is put out and updated by AARP. And it actually starts out, you can look at it online, you can print it out. But the good thing about the online version, I'm not going to click it now, but you could sort of take your mouse and hover over a state like New York, and you'd be able to click on it. It would actually take you right to the New York resources, or Connecticut, or Pennsylvania, et cetera. And so again, I'll stick with the New York theme. These resources that AARP compiles at a state by state level are usually entitled something like "How to Vote in New York's 2024 Elections." Now, this one is chock full of information related to those pesky dates that I referenced. So, each state is going to have voter registration deadlines. In the case of New York, it's October 26th for this year. Absentee ballot request deadlines, that's Saturday, October 26th. It may have some early voting options, which in New York is going to be Saturday, the October 26th through Sunday, November 3rd. and then also absentee or mail-in voting return deadlines, which is going to be really important. It will also have information. So you think, oh my God, my mom moved or my husband moved or we moved and I'm not sure where we're registered. Um, I don't know if every state has this, but most of the states that I'm familiar with, you have ways that you can check your voter registration online. So you can see if you are registered in a particular voting district. Some states also have the ability to register to vote online. I don't know that every state has that. Many will have you do that in person. These guides at a state by state level also have lots of great information related to election officials, how to contact people, etc., that you can take advantage of. So in the last substantive area I'll cover is, well, what about residents of long-term care facilities? Do their voting rights differ? Um, so specifically, if you or the person voting lives in a nursing home, you have the same rights as any other citizen of the United States, and this includes your right to vote. And nursing homes are regulated at the federal level by the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, and they have been putting out memos, at least in advance of presidential elections, significant elections, and they update them, reiterating to nursing home administrators and workers that residents have this right. Nursing homes need to respect, not just respect it, but to accommodate that. And they need to actually have very specific plans for how they are going to support their residents' right to vote. Now, other long-term care facilities like assisted livings, they should also support that right to vote. That right may not stem from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, but many of them actually have requirements at their state level to support those voting rights. Others may be affiliated or have nursing homes as part of their larger residential community, and typically they will adhere to the same type of plan. So one of the best ways to find out, well, gee, my husband or my mom or dad or son or daughter lives in a long-term care facility. How do I know what their plans are? You really should ask. And I would say ask early about what their plans are, how they're going to accommodate that. Are they going to be able to, have an election official come to the nursing home? Do they have absentee ballots? Are they expecting you as a family member or friend to help facilitate voting with your loved one? And also, if you really want to help the person living in a nursing home vote, if it's something that your husband and wife, and you've always voted together, and you want to do that in the sort of privacy of the person's room at an assisted living, let the staff know that, so that if they have a big plan and they're trying to help people vote, they don't help your loved one vote before you come in the afternoon, if that's something that you want to do together. So I guess the long and the short of it here is, when you're thinking about how to vote or where to vote, is get as much information as you can in advance of that, around deadlines, around polling place accommodations, around what a long-term care facility is going to do and how they're going to help you. That will be really important and beneficial. So as I told you, in wrapping up, I've got 3 pages of references. I think there's only 9 different references with links that you can utilize. But these references are great, and some of them have links within links, so that you can link to, say, the 50 state voting guide on accommodations, or that you could look at some of the, do's or don'ts, or the case studies. The Basilton Center, I've given you two links for that. It's intentional because this first one has a voter guide that is in plain language. And this is a little bit more about what your rights are. What are the underlying laws that support your rights? And what do you do if maybe somebody challenges you? So if a poll worker does, or that kind of thing. One thing I would say is that if you were going to vote in person and somebody challenged your ability or capacity to vote, you could always ask for what they call a provisional ballot, which is a ballot that you complete like any other ballot, but it is put aside until it is validated by election officials that, yep, this person actually is qualified to vote, eligible to vote, and we're going to count that provisional ballot. There is this full voter guide by Basilton Center. If all of a sudden you are absolutely intrigued by voting rights laws on a state-by-state basis, this is the place to go. It's got everything in footnote after footnote. We've got the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services updated memo that they just came out with a couple of weeks ago, reminding nursing home administrators about nursing home residents' right to vote. There are some articles too that I included, a couple of newsy ones. So this one is in Psychology Today. People with dementia have the right to vote, and this is some of what is, gee, how do you work with somebody? How do you help them? How do you work with them when they have some communication challenges? Paula Spahn, who writes an old age column for the New York Times, wrote this column, having dementia doesn't mean you can't vote, 4 years ago for the New York Times, but it's still very relevant. The AARP guide was actually compiled by Michelle Sulo, so that's where that reference is. And if you want a little bit more info about voting for long-term care residents, there is a consumer guide. So that's what we have there. And I think, Steph, should I turn it back to you to talk a little bit about navigators, and then some of our other exciting news at the end?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks. Thanks for that, Trish. So, so helpful, so insightful. But yeah, so I just wanted to encourage anybody who's on the call, if you have specific questions, or, if you're struggling with issues around this, you can actually give our team a call. We're happy to support you, with questions around, if you're a person living with dementia and you're looking to vote and are looking for some support with that, we can certainly reiterate some of the things that Trish has brought up here. And also, if you're a family member or friend providing care, if you're a professional, if you've got questions, we're happy to, to take some of those now, but we're available to you. And here's our phone number and our information. And Trisha's got her email address there as well. And so if there's something in particular that you're welcome to reach out to her directly.